Now, with the next story, the next set of things we're going to think about, we have gone from the Stone Age, and we're now into the Bronze Age, and next it will be the Iron Age. But for now, bronze. Why bronze? Why stone? Well, stone was the things that people used to make tools and implements and weapons even. But bronze was when people began to mix copper and tin and put them in a big, or warm them up in a fire in somewhere like a blacksmith, and they could make weapons and swords and spears and tools and things for farming, all kinds of things made with bronze. It was better than stone, not as good as iron, but it was what they had at the time. And let's just think about the Bronze Age in the world as well as here. Now, going on at this time, several thousand years ago, were other big civilizations like ancient Egypt, the pyramids and the Sphinx and all those things there, and that's where writing and recording things was beginning. As you know, the Egyptians would draw pictures, a bit like your talk for writing, to describe things. There was even a letter from someone in Egypt saying, "Oh dear, the people of today, the young people of today, they're terrible. They don't respect their elders, their hair is too long." That's a letter written in pictures thousands of years ago. Further away from Egypt, in a big country called Mesopotamia, they were writing on little blocks, little tablets of clay. And the writing was made with a sharp instrument, lots of lines and angles and triangles. And the oldest story ever written down, not the oldest one told, written down, was the tale of Gilgamesh. What a name! You should look that up. What happened to Gilgamesh and his big friend Enkidu? It's a great story, that is. Now, also we have in China, even further away, there was a thing called the Shang dynasty, like a whole series of kings and queens. One queen, she was called Lady Fu Hao. Whoa, if you think Mulan is bad, this woman was real, and nobody messed with her. Fantastic. Great story, Shang Dynasty, look it up. Now, of course, the other country, the other civilization, a bit closer to home, was ancient Greece. Now, there are many, many stories about ancient Greece which are actually real. But perhaps the oldest shared story, which was just told before being written down, it was told for maybe 300 years before the first person wrote it down, was a thing written in the mind of a guy called Homer. And it was all about a big struggle between kings in Greece and across the sea in what is now Turkey, there was a little town called Troy. And there's a big story called the Iliad, which is all about the battle for that town of Troy. And then there's another story about the return from there by one king called Odysseus. And for example, here's a book called The Odyssey, The Journey Home. You should read these things. You should hear these things told. They are amazing. All life is here. Also in the Bronze Age, I'm told, the wheel was invented, and also the potter's wheel, so that things like this were able to be made. When it was wet clay was put on a wheel, and they used to spin it round and round and gradually create a pot like this. Fantastic stuff, isn't it? And that's still used today. And of course the wheel is still used today. But also in this country, they were still using those stone circles that we mentioned earlier in the Stone Age video, and art was becoming big, literally. I mean, look at this. This is a horse carved into the hillside in a place called Uffington. Great sweeping lines and filled with chalk, and it's still there. Beautiful thing. Okay, you can see it best from the air. They weren't able to do that in the Bronze Age, but that's beautiful stuff. And so it was a time of great creativity. But there's one person who stands out for me, who we've only known about since about 2002. In Stonehenge, as you know, those big stones that we mentioned before, they are all the time looking for things buried under the ground. Maybe there's a little settlement that was close by, or they find some tools or weapons. 18 years ago, they found a grave. And there was a man in the grave, lying on his side. And he was surrounded by gold, by lots of arrowheads, by pots like this one down here, and he also had a wrist guard which archers would use to stop the string whacking against their wrist. And that grave, I understand, was so rich, full of treasures, and it was a little place called Amesbury, and they reckon this guy was about 45. And then close by they found another grave with another skeleton inside it, and they did tests between the two skeletons using that DNA we spoke of, and they found that they were related, and they think that this is the grave of the father and this is the grave of his son. And they thought, oh, is this the king of Stonehenge, or is he a magician? We don't know. Just know that he's related to this young man here. But what a story, that only recently we find this grave full of treasure. And the other thing that they found was that the man was not from this country. They could work out that he'd come all the way from probably Switzerland. They could tell by looking at his teeth. How they do that, I don't know, but they could tell that he'd lived in that sort of place, and he'd wandered across, maybe across the sea, or perhaps because we were joined to Europe in those days, the sea was lower, he might have walked across and become the king of Stonehenge, or the magician. We'll never know. Now, the next thing we're going to is the Iron Age. Are you going to come with me?